Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer and thank you for visiting. So today is a little bit different. I thought I would just show you a few things that I often do when I'm planning out cards or I have some new products that I want to play with. I find it easiest if I do a bit of planning so that I don't mess up along the way and struggle as I'm actually creating the cards. I'll show you how I pick my colors and make sure that they work well together, and then how I remember those for the future. Also, I'll show you some tips on creating a guide so you can make a few different cards at once, or at least kind of plan out what you're going to do for one card. I'm hoping that watching this process is helpful to you, and I'll have a lot to share along the way. Let's first talk about ink selection. Now, here's the thing. There are a lot of great inks out there, and everybody has favorites, depending on how they stamp, what paper they use, and so on. Everybody gets different results. So I encourage you to try a few before investing in many. I also encourage you to mix different company inks together. You don't need to stick to one line. However, I know many of you do prefer to do that. So today I plan to stick with one line also. If you've watched my videos, you know that I really like Altenew dye inks because they come in a great color range with super light inks all the way up to super dark inks. And so they're great for layering. So today I'll be using those. I will also be using full-size ink pads, but these Altenew inks are available in ink cubes. Now recently Altenew came out with two little mini collections. One contains super light inks and the other contains super dark inks. So they kind of add on to some of the colors they already have. Altenew inks usually come in a light, medium, dark, and extra dark that all go together nicely. You can buy them together or separate. Well, now there's a super light to add to the front of that and a super dark to add to the end. So this is the first collection. These are the light ones. You can see the different light colors here. There's pink, like a peachish, orange, yellow, green, mint, and blue. And I'll be using several of these today. I'm particularly excited about these because there aren't that many great super light inks available, and these are really good. Now there are also some very dark inks available. These are just so rich and beautiful. The reason I'm showing you these ink colors first is whenever new inks come out from companies that I use often, people always ask for a peek. So I wanted to be able to share them with you. I like how they kind of did a rainbow of super light and a rainbow of super dark, so you can use them along with inks you already have. Also, I wanted to mention that I have a new downloads section on my website where you can get free ink swatch downloads for any of your favorite inks, and I do keep them up to date now. So I will have a link to those free ink swatch downloads below if you find creating swatches helpful. Everybody's different. I find it very helpful. Okay, so there you can see that super light color up there at the top and the super dark at the bottom, and you can see in that column of inks how it works really well there. So now there are 6 inks that would work well together. Here's another column of colors. So those 4 in the middle would be ones that are already out, that are kind of sold together. You can buy them separate, but they are meant to kind of go together. Now there's a super light and a super dark to go with it. If you do a lot of stamp layering like me, this might be something that appeals to you because you have so many more options now to get a beautiful stamp layered image. Also, you don't need all of them. So if say there are 6 colors here, maybe just get the lightest and a couple of the others, and you can always make those stretch by double or triple stamping to make darker, whatever you want. But I really am excited about those super light ones in particular. And I'll be demonstrating some of these inks in today's video. Okay, now let me share with you one of the things that I like to do to remember which inks go together well for layered stamping or even just for any kind of stamping technique. This has been a big time saver for me, and it may be for you too. Maybe not. Some people like to kind of just wing it as they go. It totally depends on what works for you. Now, the stamp set that I'm demonstrating with today is this new Altenew Fancy Star stamp set. It's a 4x6 stamp set. There is also a coordinating stencil available that helps to kind of add even more layers if you want. I will be using both today. And keep in mind, you could use them separately too. Now, I love that Altenew always includes a layering guide with some suggestions. However, there are a bunch of different ways you could do your own creative layering with these sets, and I'll show lots of that today. But keep in mind what I'm about to show with kind of remembering which particular inks go well together. You could do this with any stamp sets you may already have. I just really like the set, and I wanted to turn these practice stampings into cards, which I'll do at the end of this video. So what I do is I look at my ink swatches and I choose like 3 or 4 inks that I think might work well together. And then I stamp them together layered so I can see what they actually look like layered. This would work for layering flowers, layering trees, anything. Here I'm just using that layering star. I write down there next to it what those colors are. So I usually do like a pink, a red, an orange, a yellow, a green, a teal, a blue, and a purple. And that way I can keep these on hand. So next time I want to stamp, say, a blue flower, I can refer back to this list of 4 blue inks that work well together for layering. And this is especially helpful if you have different ink lines. So say you use a light blue from Altenew, a dark blue from Hero Arts, a medium from Gina. You can stamp an example of that, write the colors down next to it, and that way you have something to refer to in the future, and it'll save you time in the long run. Now what I do here is I just take a photo of this when I'm done. I just grab my photo, I take a quick picture of the layered image and the names of the inks next to it, and I just save that in a folder on my phone for future reference. You could just save these if you want to, but I took the time to make these layered stars and I really like them, so I'm actually going to die cut them out and make them into simple cards at the end of this video, so you can stay tuned for that. But by practicing your ink color combinations ahead of time and remembering them, it saves you time when you go to create, and you can get into the actual creating much faster. So this is just something that works for me. If you like to wing it as you go, definitely stick with that, whatever works for you. I find doing things like this very helpful when I feel like I have no creativity. I do something like this and it kind of gets me kick-started. And I have this information that I can refer back to anytime. It took me about an hour to do this. So I took my photos, I've saved all this information for future reference. Now I'm die cutting out those circles, and at the end of this video, I will turn those into simple cards. But next, I wanted to spend some time showing you how I kind of plan out a design. I find it helpful to have a guide. This way, I don't mess up as much or struggle my way through a card. For some people, winging it is the best way to go. But if you get kind of hung up sometimes, this may help you out. I will be demonstrating the process of creating a stamping guide with some repetitive stamping of some stars. However, this works really well if you are creating like a scene of little critters and trees and such, or even just trying to figure out where to place things on a card. It really is helpful for all different types of card designs. So again, I'm doing some repeat stamping. So I have a piece of cardstock here. This is 7 by 7. You could do whatever size you want. I chose this size because that way I could turn my stamped pieces into 5 by 7 cards, mini slimline, or regular A2. I'm drawing a line vertically and horizontally right down the center, and then I'm also drawing a line connecting the corners. Now these pencil lines will just help me with placement to do the repetitive stamped backgrounds. You could do the same technique with a variety of different stamps. You could do this with snowflakes, you could do this with hearts, anything you want. But I thought these layering stars would be perfect. So I just am using this piece of cardstock as my guide. Sorry, my head gets in the way there. I'm placing one of the larger images from that star stamp set right there at the middle, using the pencil lines as a guide for placement. And I'm just doing some quick stamping with any kind of ink. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a great stamped image. This is just a guide for future cards. Okay, so now after I've done the one in the center, I'll start building up the images around it. In this case, I'm just stamping the same image above it and below it. Now you can see how using a stamping tool such as the MISTI is very helpful because I can stamp it once, rotate it 180 degrees, and then stamp it again. Here I decided to even stamp them in between. It's totally up to you. Now if you're doing this with an acrylic block, you could just eyeball it following those pencil lines as I'm doing here and stamp each one individually. Then later when you go to stamp your actual card, you'll just kind of eyeball it again to follow the same kind of plan. Now, doing a plan here was helpful for me because I wanted to make sure that I didn't place my stars too far apart or too close together. So by doing this, I can save the time and frustration as I'm creating the backgrounds for my card. Now, say I was doing a card with a scene of maybe a snowman, a Santa, a tree, and a sleigh. I would just stamp those along the bottom of a card, just using the same ink, overlapping the images so I don't have to think about it, and get the scene stamped quickly. Then when I go to make my card, I can use that as a guide for stamp placement, and it'll make masking and other things much easier. So here I did a bunch of guides. Check out all these different looks that I have from this one stamp set. Now these are just one piece, like one stamped image per little star. I'm going to do a lot of layering, but I don't need to do the layering on the guide. I just need that first image. So let's get started making a bunch of backgrounds. Now you could do the same thing with one background, but I'm doing 4 because I love the process and I want to practice with those new ink color combinations I came up with. So I'm not stamping the star in the middle because I decided I wanted to add a large sentiment there later. So I'm starting with one of the outside stars. That's one of the great things about the guide is I know that this will leave enough room in the middle for a large sentiment or another star because I've already planned it out. Now, if you want to create a background with lots more repetition, kind of coming out from the center of the card, I highly recommend the Gina Wreath Builder. That allows you to create a beautiful background kind of radiating out of the center or from a focal point on your card. In this case, I just wanted like rows of stars down the 2 sides of the background. I will link to a video about the Wreath Builder if you want to check that out. So you can see here, I am just double stamping all my images because I like to do that. You don't need to double stamp. These images will dry nice and smooth and crisp, but I'm in the habit of double stamping, so that's what I do. As for the inks I'm using, they are the inks that I figured out earlier when I did those practice runs. So I will provide over on my blog a list of the different particular inks I used for each of the colored stars. So I'll have a link below so you can check that out. And hopefully you can save that list and try those colors too if you have Altenew inks. Okay, after I've done those 4 stars on my 4 backgrounds, it's time to move on to another image. So I go back to my guide and I follow the placement of the stamp so that I can get the same placement on all my backgrounds. The guide can be a true time saver, and the best part is you can save it for future cards also. By the way, you might notice a little dot in my stamp here. It won't be like that in the ones that they send into production. This was just one that they sent me early to try out. So just know that yours wouldn't have that little dot. Now notice I'm only stamping the first layer of these layering images. That way I can have the placement. And then when I go to add the additional layers, it's easy to just go back to that first spot. So say you're doing a planned background with some flowers and leaves. I recommend starting with the most solid image first and doing that because that's usually the largest image. And that way you can make sure you have enough room for that. So I start with the largest image first and plan out around from that. So now that I've done that largest image for each, I am now coming and stamping the layers to each. So I'm just lining it up. You could use your guide to line it up, but here I'm just lining it up with one of my backgrounds. And I'm using one of the lighter ink colors and stamping on top of my darker blue stars. And then I will go do the same with all the other backgrounds. Now I'm not going to show all of this stamping because it's very easy. I am following the layering suggestion that Altenew included with the stamp set, but I did end up kind of veering away from it and doing my own thing. I like when the stamps easily line up for many different options as these do. I think you could definitely make this a holiday card, kind of give it a snowflake feel if you want to, but I'm just going with a general star theme. Now I continued to do more and more layers. So here I'm adding my 3rd layer. The more layers, I think the more detail you get. I think I did 4 or 5 layers, and these took me a couple hours to put together, which I don't think is bad because I'll end up with 4 cards. Now I have a more detailed one here that I'm doing in a super dark color. So one of those dark new inks from Altenew. I do recommend doing really light and really dark when you're doing any kind of layered stamping because that contrast really helps to make the image pop. So you can see how the stars are kind of little bland there on the bottom. Once we add the darker detail stamping on it, it really stands out even more. I decided to also use a solid dot image that's included in the stamp set to do a dark dot at the center of each of these. It kind of creates a little focal point for each of the stars. Another thing you could do to make the stars pop is to do a little heat embossing. So maybe these detailed images could be silver or gold heat embossed. Okay, so after I did some more stamping, I did use a little bit of the stencil to add some soft color here and there. So I'm using one of the super soft ink colors and an Altenew ink blending tool and just lining it up and easily just adding a bit of light color. You'll notice that I didn't do the outside stars that are on the edge of my cardstock because I did decide that I wanted to make these for a typical A2 card, and those will be out of that range. Now I like that there is this stencil available because you could create the stars just using the stencil, but it also allows you to put a really soft amount of color down, or you could add like glitter paste or glitter gel or something else to give dimension to them. So it's nice to have the different options. Okay, so now I have my 4 backgrounds done, and I plan to cut this with my trimmer. Now you could use a large rectangle die, but for me, for some reason, I just always go back to my trimmer for basic cutting of rectangles, and I'm cutting these backgrounds to be a little bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Now that I have trimmed it down to the size I want for my card, I did decide I wanted to make the star at the top and the bottom stand out a little bit more, make it bigger. So I'm using that stencil and just adding some soft ink around it. Now it's time to add a sentiment, and I thought I'd use some large die cut letters. And this gives me the opportunity to share with you how I get the placement just right of die cuts on my card. This is a great trick that can also save you time and make sure things are placed just where you want it. I thought the perfect alphabet dies to work in this little spot would be the Altenew Mighty alphabet dies. I really like these because they're tall, skinny, and narrow, so you can fit words on your card better. Now what I did is I cut the letters for the word star 3 times each, twice from white cardstock and once from black glossy cardstock, and I glued those together. I then am putting each of those letters onto a sticky mat, which is over there on the right-hand side. I use my sticky mat for lots of things. I will link to the one I use. If it's too sticky when you get it, just press a towel over it a few times to remove some of the stick, and then it'll work for you for a long time. So I place the letter onto the sticky mat using the guidelines on the sticky mat to make sure it's straight. I then will do the same for the other letters, layering up the layers and placing it on the sticky mat. This allows me to kind of play around with the placement and the spacing and make sure that they're straight. I also like that the sticky mat is clear, so I can pick it up and hold it over my card to make sure I like the spacing and the placement. It's a huge help to me to make sure I get the die cut placement I like. It also lets me experiment too. Say I'm trying to figure out where to put different snowflakes on a background. I can do it on my sticky mat with the card behind it, and I can keep moving until I'm happy with the placement, and I don't have to worry about them shifting as I'm experimenting. So now that I'm happy with my placement, I'm taking a piece of masking tape and pressing it onto those die cuts, and I'll lift them all up together. The sticky on the masking tape is definitely stronger than the sticky on my sticky mat, so they come off easy. And look at, they're all together. It's like I'm dealing with one die cut. You could do this with bigger die cuts that are placed farther apart by using a piece of masking tape or masking paper or press and seal. Has the same effect. Okay, so now I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of each of these letters. I'll do it for all 4 letters so I can place them all down together. And this is fun. I can pick up that tape and move it around over the card until I'm happy with where I have it positioned, and then press it down, leave the tape there while it dries, and then peel it off later. So if you want to, you could always just eyeball it if that works better for you. But if you're one of those who likes to make sure you're happy with the placement, the sticky mat and the tape can definitely help you out. For the rest of the sentiment, I wanted to heat emboss "You Shine Like A" to put on the word star. I'm using this Altenew Stunning Starflower set. This is a new one. It's a 6x8 layering set. The stamp set comes with the layering guide that has the instructions. It also has suggestions for color combinations, which is super helpful, and design suggestions. Now, I am going to be using this to make a set of note cards for my mom for Christmas. I do this every year, and I just come up with a design, create a guide for it like I did earlier. I refer back to some of my favorite ink collections that I've taken photos of, and I make a bunch of the same card, but in different colors. And this is really helpful because there are coordinating dies for it and a coordinating stencil. So I could put a layer of like glitter gel over the completed flower if I wanted to. Lots of things to do. But I just wanted to show you that's where that part of the sentiment that says "You shine like a" is from. I white heat embossed that onto a black cardstock strip and glued it right onto the letters for star. Next, I trimmed down the backgrounds to be a little bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I added them onto colored note cards. I also added some gemstones to the star patterns. Now, you could skip this. It takes some time to add each of those gemstones, but I dig gemstones. I like to add them. I love the sparkle they provide, but you could skip it, or you could use like little stickles or Nuvo drops to add little accents instead. Totally up to you. Here you can see on those layered stars, super light color all the way to super dark color, creating a really beautiful star with lots of contrast to it. Now this is on a note card that I made from Hero Art's lapis blue cardstock. It is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I do put a white piece on the inside where I write my personal message. I have a matching envelope with a sentiment on it also, and I'll show you that in a bit. Here's one of the other backgrounds I created. This time, I put the background onto a black note card. There's something striking about black when you have lots of white and color on a card. So it really helps to make it pop and stand out even more. Now, I use the same sentiment on each of these backgrounds, but one of the things you could do instead is create these 4 cards and leave the center blank. Then when you have an occasion like birthday or congratulations or whatever that you need a particular card for, you can go and add that to the card and be ready to go. Okay, so here is a look at all those 4 cards, and I did want to show you the stamp set that I stamped onto the envelope because it goes together nicely with the sentiment I have on the card itself. The sentiment says, "I hope your day shines as brightly as you do." And it is from this older Altenew stamp set that I use quite a bit. It's the Bright Blossoms stamp set. Okay, now remember at the beginning of this video, I created those single stars in different colors just so I could come up with some little ink collections. Well, now I wanted to turn these into cards. And this is a design that I go back to a lot when I'm struggling creatively because it creates a nice focal point but has a lot of interest to it. And keep in mind you could put any images inside the little window. Now here are all my stars from before. I used a circle die to cut them out simply because it was fast to do. You could definitely just cut them out with scissors or with a trimmer, doesn't matter at all. Now I like to use a frame die to cut my front panels of simple cards with something special to it. So I used the Altenew Mix and Match frame die set. I've used this many times in videos. I like the large rectangle that cuts little circles on the inside edge. There are many dies like this. Maybe you have some that cut faux stitching or other interesting things on the outside edge. It's just a little more fun than a plain rectangle. I also cut a circle towards the top center of each of those die cut frames. And now I'm building some dimension behind those. So these are just inexpensive pieces of white cardstock that are cut slightly smaller than our frame. I'm tracing a circle onto each of those and then using a slightly larger circle die to cut around those traced circles. Now these pieces I am layering together to put behind our fancy frame and give it dimension. So I'm gluing 3 of these together and then we'll put our frame on top. Now you don't need to add dimension. I always remind you of this. No need to add dimension if you don't want to. I just really like the look of it. You could also use foam tape, but I do find using layered cardstock holds up significantly better going through the mail. It's less expensive, and you can use scraps for this portion too. I actually do so much layering that I don't have many scraps left over to do this, but that's what I usually reach for first. Okay, so I have those 3 layered together, and now I'll glue this back to the back of our fancy frame. Now what I'll do is glue this over our star. So our star will be a little bit set back, and then the circle window will stand out a little bit. I could have just glued the circle right on the front, but by setting it back, it makes it a little more interesting. So now I can glue this all onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. I did use colored note card just to make the colors stand out a bit more. So the way I made this simple design a little more special was by using a frame die that had a little specialty to it, those little dots, and then also layering up those layers and setting back our focal point image. You could instead pop the focal point image. It's just fun to do something different. You could also turn it into a shaker card if you wanted. For the sentiment, I used the Altenew Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set. I've used this a billion times in videos, and I white heat embossed that on black cardstock and added it right at the center of our focal point image. Now, a lot of people ask why I cover focal point images with a sentiment. Why not put it down below it or next to it or something? I like to put my sentiments right in the focal point because the sentiment should be the focal point to me. So that's why I like to do it. I used hello there for each of the cards because that's an occasion I use the most, just a general hello. But you could leave the sentiment off and, again, add a particular sentiment when you have a certain occasion in mind. So these cards really helped me in many ways because I was able to create a little custom ink palette that I could remember for the future by taking a picture of it. So this was kind of a practice piece, the star, but I was able to turn it into a card pretty quickly with using this basic design. This is another thing that I encourage you to do. It's good to find a card design that you are very comfortable with, that you like. So if you are ever struggling creatively, you can just grab a cute stamp image or a die cut and use it on that familiar design that you like to do. It takes away some of the thinking. So for example, this one, if I was struggling creatively, but I had this cute, say, Yeti stamp that I've been wanting to use, I could stamp and color the Yeti, put him in the window instead, and have a completely different look. And it kind of gets your creative juices going by creating something familiar. So those are just some tips I wanted to share with you about how I go about creating cards. For me, I also like making multiple cards. It makes me happy to do so because I love that joy of creating. But remember, you can do all of these cards just single cards if you prefer. Remember, when you watch somebody making YouTube videos, we're sharing what we find works for us. It's good for you to determine what works for you. Maybe give this a try, some of the tips I shared today, and hopefully they help you. Okay, so if you're interested in anything I used today, it is linked below in my YouTube description. I always have it there. But go over to my blog because I will share those color combinations that I used. I have more information. I have the free ink swatch download and much more. Also at the end here, I'll have a couple other videos for you. And I am so thankful you watched once again. I always appreciate it, especially when you watch to the end. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.